Think politics is messy today? Let me take you back to Lyndon B. Johnson, the towering Texan who could pass landmark legislation in the morning and shock his colleagues in the afternoon by, well, let's just say introducing them to Jumbo. Yes, we're talking about a president who blurred the lines between brilliance and brazenness in ways you wouldn't believe. Stay tuned, it's a wild ride through power, persuasion, and presidential failings. Welcome to Whispers of the White House, where we discuss all things politics, especially scandals, and truths behind policies and figures, but fairly, or at least try to do it in the most unbiased way. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Wisdom, and today we're getting up close and very personal with Lyndon Baines Johnson, or as you might know him, LBJ. First, let's start with LBJ's childhood. Rebecca Baines Johnson, LBJ's mother, was the dominant influence in his early life. A strict schoolteacher with a strong moral code, Rebecca instilled in young Lyndon a love for education and a relentless drive to succeed. But their relationship was far from typical. LBJ adored his mother, to the point of obsession. He once admitted to dreaming about her regularly and would refer to her in ways that, frankly, make us uncomfortable today. He would describe her as sexy, hot, and gorgeous, terms that are highly unusual, especially for the era. LBJ's father, Sam Ely Johnson Jr., was a Texas state senator and an alcoholic. His political career brought both success and scandal, and he wasn't home much, leaving Rebecca to run the household. Lyndon grew up craving his father's approval, but it was his mother's opinion that mattered most. Rebecca's influence was so strong that even as a grown man, LBJ would seek validation from her. But while LBJ idolized his mother, his sister, Josepha Johnson, lived a very different life. Josepha was wild and rebellious, known for her partying, drinking, and affairs. She pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable for women in conservative Texas society, and her lifestyle was far from the disciplined world her mother had tried to enforce. As a young man, LBJ's ambition was evident from the start. While attending college at Southwest Texas State Teachers College, he had a unique strategy for finding success. By dating the daughters of wealthy and influential men. His goal? To marry into wealth and power. LBJ would court these women briefly, and then, without much preamble, ask their fathers for their hand in marriage. It was a bold move, but it didn't always work. Most of these fathers turned him down, likely seeing through his transparent motives. Still, this pattern tells us a lot about Johnson's character. He was always strategizing, always scheming, and always looking for the next opportunity to climb the social and political ladder. His early failures in love didn't deter him. Instead, they fueled his ambition. He may not have been able to charm his way into a wealthy family, but he was determined to find other ways to achieve power and influence. Enter Lady Bird. It was September 5, 1934, in Austin, Texas, when Lyndon Baines Johnson first met Lady Bird Taylor. At the time, Lyndon was a young congressional aide, already showing the drive and ambition that would define his career. Lady Bird, on the other hand, was the daughter of a wealthy Texas plantation owner, educated, refined, and deeply rooted in Southern values. Within just a few hours of meeting Lady Bird, LBJ was already proposing marriage. That's right. Lyndon, with his trademark intensity, decided almost immediately that Lady Bird was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. For most people, a same-day proposal would seem reckless or absurd, but for LBJ, it was entirely in character. He wasn't one to waste time, and once he set his sights on something, or someone, he pursued it with relentless determination. Lady Bird, however, wasn't quite as impulsive. She didn't say yes right away. Instead, she took some time to think about it. But during that time, Lyndon bombarded her with letters, phone calls, and telegrams, expressing his affection and outlining the future he envisioned for them. He wasn't just courting her, he was pitching her a vision of their life together, one that would involve political success, power, and of course, her unwavering support. LBJ once said, "I've never known a day when I wasn't in love with her," and it's true. Lady Bird wasn't just his wife. She was the calming force behind his relentless ambition. But let's not sugarcoat it. Their relationship wasn't always smooth. Lyndon was a demanding, domineering partner, often putting politics above everything else, including their marriage. His infidelities and relentless work ethic would put a strain on their relationship, and Lady Bird often had to quietly endure the more difficult aspects of his personality. Yet she never faltered. She believed in his mission and knew that her role was essential to his success. Lady Bird once said, "Lyndon loved people, and I loved Lyndon." It was a simple statement, but it speaks volumes about the dynamic between them. She understood him, flaws and all, and she accepted the sacrifices that came with being married to a man destined for greatness and controversy. Now let's get to know Johnson a little more. Johnson wasn't just any politician. He was a master of persuasion, a force of nature in the political arena, and, let's be honest, he had an ego the size of Texas. But what really set him apart? Well, we could talk about his landmark achievements like the Civil Rights Act, Medicare, and the Great Society, all of which have their own controversies tied to them. Or we could talk about Jumbo, and I don't mean his legislative agenda. If you think Trump is a womaning narcissist or Machiavellian, let me introduce you to Johnson, who once literally pulled out his penis during a policy discussion and proudly named it Jumbo. And you thought politics today was inappropriate. Let's discuss what made Johnson such a political powerhouse, his famous Johnson treatment. No, that's not a euphemism. Well, not yet. The Johnson treatment was Johnson's signature style of persuasion, getting right up in your face, literally, and wearing you down until you agreed with him. Imagine being cornered in a room with a 6'3" Texan towering over you, staring you down, and talking so fast you could barely keep up. And just when you thought it couldn't get more intense, he's got his hand on your shoulder, leaning in close, eyes locked on yours. Oh, and did I mention this sometimes happened in the bathroom? Yep, while he was on the toilet. This was Johnson's way of letting you know that personal space was optional when he was around. One of his staffers famously said, when Johnson leaned in, you knew he wasn't there to admire your cologne. And it worked. Johnson knew everything about the people he spoke to, their fears, their ambitions, their dirty little secrets, and he used that information like a skilled poker player. Except, in this game, he was playing with your career. No wonder he got so much done. But enough about politics. Let's talk about Jumbo. That's right, Johnson's beloved appendage. And boy, did he love to talk about it. You see, Lyndon B. Johnson had a very hands-on sense of humor. He wasn't just a politician. He was a one-man comedy show. His jokes were crude, inappropriate, and often involved his favorite body part. Let's just say, if you found yourself in a conversation about foreign policy with him, you might end up hearing about domestic matters you didn't ask for. Take, for instance, one of the most infamous stories in Johnson lore. During a meeting in the Capitol, a fellow lawmaker asked Johnson why the U.S. was pouring so much money into Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. Now, most presidents might offer some strategic explanation. Johnson? He simply unzipped his pants, whipped out Jumbo, and said, "This is why." He had so much pride in Jumbo that it's almost comical, except it wasn't a joke. Johnson would actually compare himself to other men in ways that would make anyone blush. And no one was safe from these comparisons. He didn't care if you were a senator, a staffer, or an unfortunate passerby. He'd tell you all about it. One time at his ranch, where he loved skinny dipping with male colleagues, he swam over to a young aide, glanced down, and casually remarked, "That's no dick. This is a dick." I'm guessing there wasn't a lot of eye contact at work after that. Now let's switch gears, because believe it or not, Johnson's inappropriate sense of humor wasn't the only scandalous part of his life. Johnson was a notorious womanizer. His affairs weren't exactly well-kept secrets either. In fact, he once boasted, "I've had more women by accident than Kennedy ever had on purpose." Can we just pause and appreciate the sheer audacity of that statement? Wow. First, let's talk about Johnson's secretaries. They were way more than just office help. They were like personal assistants in a chaotic, inappropriate reality show. Alice Glasspool allegedly played matchmaker, helping Johnson juggle his romantic entanglements, while Marie Famer was his emotional support human. Think of these two as the Ghislaine Maxwell of their time. Johnson was known for breaking barriers and hired Geraldine Whittington, the first black secretary to serve as a U.S. president. Unfortunately, she didn't escape the Johnson treatment. She had to endure Johnson's crass and racial jokes while at the ranch, but it is rumored he taught her to swim, so I guess there's that. At his Texas ranch, Johnson treated his staff like they were at summer camp, insisting they wear swimsuits and hold meetings by the pool, or, even better, while he was on the toilet. Johnson constantly pushed boundaries and reminded everyone who was in charge, no matter how bizarre the setting. Despite Johnson's antics, the secretaries kept it together, probably earning medals in awkward situation management and not slapping the boss. Johnson didn't just have affairs, he wore them like badges of honor. Alice Glass was one of the most well-known women in his life. Married to a powerful Texas businessman, Alice wasn't just a fling. She had political clout, and Johnson knew it. Their relationship was an open secret in Washington, and she helped him secure key media support early in his career. Then there was Madeline Brown, who claimed she had a 20-year affair with Johnson and even said he fathered her son. And this is where things get really juicy. Madeline famously claimed that on the night before JFK's assassination, Johnson whispered to her at a party, "After tomorrow, those Kennedys will never embarrass me again." The next day, JFK was shot in Dallas. Now, is it true? Most historians dismiss it, but let's be real. Johnson was the kind of guy who could say something that outrageous and mean it. Another one of Johnson's rumored affairs may be, well, along the lines of a Harvey Weinstein move, Anne Fisher Brinkley, the wife of famed journalist David Brinkley. The story goes, one weekend David Brinkley and his wife attended an engagement with Johnson. I'm unclear if this was at the White House or at his ranch, but allegedly, David Brinkley had to leave to turn in his report. Remember, there were no emails or computers at this time. So he left his wife behind with Johnson and others, as many husbands did, not believing anything sinister would ensue. At some point in the middle of the night, he came into her room, pulled back the covers, and said, "This here's the president, honey, shove over," and then had sex with her. This was not the only time he did this. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who later wrote the book Lyndon Johnson and the American Dream, is said to also be a victim of the "this is your president, darling, scoot over" treatment. Next, Helen Gahagan Douglas, a trailblazer, transitioned from Broadway star and opera singer to becoming a congresswoman from California in 1945. Known for her progressive stances on labor rights, civil rights, and anti-communism, she made a strong impression in Washington. Her relationship with Lyndon B. Johnson began at FDR's funeral, where he seduced her despite her prominence, and FDR lying in wake in the next room. Their affair became public, with Johnson openly displaying affection. While they shared political values, Johnson was also drawn to her beauty and charisma. Then there are the female reporters who may have faced some of the most inappropriate treatment. Take Nancy Dickerson, one of the first prominent female journalists in Washington. She had the misfortune of being literally chased around a hotel room by Johnson while she was just trying to conduct an interview. He told her, "I'm an uncaged animal." Luckily for her, she got out of the room before he got his hands on her. Then there's the time he invited a group of female reporters to his Texas ranch. While showing them around, he pointed out some cows mating and thought it'd be a great opportunity to give a lecture on bulls. Let's just say it wasn't the type of briefing anyone wanted. His remark, "That's what it's all about, making sure the bull gets the job done." For the reporters, the moment was awkward and unprofessional, turning their work visit into an uncomfortable spectacle. These affairs, and I say that loosely because some seem downright like assault, weren't exactly hidden. Washington insiders knew about it, but back then, the media kept a blind eye, so most of it didn't make the headlines. And as we've heard, it wasn't just one or two women. It was secretaries, reporters, political advisors, and even fellow politicians and friends' wives. Johnson had an entire roster of women, and through all of this, there was Lady Bird Johnson, standing by her husband's side. Lady Bird was the picture of grace, poise, and loyalty. She wasn't blind to Johnson's behavior. She knew about his affairs. In fact, she once walked in on him with another woman. His solution? Installing a buzzer system in the White House, so he'd get a heads up when she was coming. But Lady Bird had her own agenda. She was a powerhouse in her own right, pushing for environmental reforms and public broadcasting initiatives. And while she may have turned a blind eye to his affairs, she kept her eye firmly on his legacy and her own. So where does this leave us? On one hand, Johnson was a political genius who passed landmark legislation that shaped modern America. On the other hand, he was a guy who loved skinny dipping, showing off his anatomy, and making sure everyone knew just how big of a deal he was. Lyndon B. Johnson was a man of contradictions, brilliant but brazen, progressive in policy but problematic in personal life. If history has taught us anything, it's that our leaders are rarely the heroes or villains we make them out to be. They're human, and in Johnson's case, a very human human. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Lyndon B. Johnson, it's impossible not to draw comparisons to other powerful figures who have followed in his footsteps, particularly when it comes to how they handled their personal lives. Let's face it, when it comes to juggling power, politics, and personal scandals, Lyndon B. Johnson isn't alone. Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and he are like the unholy trinity of presidential drama. Each had their own flair for bad behavior with women, yet somehow managed to keep their political careers afloat. Johnson was a master of compartmentalization, keeping his affairs on the down low while getting civil rights legislation passed. It's almost like he had a scandal invisibility cloak. Meanwhile, Clinton took a nosedive into national headlines with Monica Lewinsky, proving once and for all that charm doesn't work when the media's on your tail. But hey, he still left office with a booming economy, so that's something. Then there's Trump, who didn't just ride the scandal wave. He surfed it, built a hotel on it, and named it after himself. His controversies were as endless as his tweets, and somehow, like Johnson, he turned his outrageous behavior into political fuel. And don't forget the women behind the drama: Lady Bird Johnson, Hillary Clinton, and Melania Trump, each handling their husbands' messes like pros. Stoic, strategic, and probably deserving of their own presidential medals of patience, they navigated the chaos without losing their cool, at least publicly. They knew the game. Sticking around wasn't just about love, but about legacy, survival, and making sure they weren't sidelined in the wake of their husbands' indiscretions. In the end, all three men proved that when it comes to scandals, it's not about avoiding them. It's about surviving them with your political legacy intact. Thanks for joining me on this wild ride through Johnson's life, politics, and, well, Jumbo. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe for more stories from the private lives of America's presidents. Be sure to follow me on social media. I'm Heather Wisdom. Until next time, stay curious, stay wise, and don't believe every whisper you hear.